Did you know the Greater Whitsunday region boasts the highest density of METS businesses in the Southern Hemisphere? Well, now you do. In fact, more than 700 METS businesses call this region home. And what that translates to is a region whose vocational expertise runs extremely deep. So how do we leverage that expertise to benefit the region in the future? Hi everyone, and welcome to our very first METS and More podcast. I'm Jodie Thompson, Project Coordinator on the Decarbonisation Accelerated project. Today we're talking all things METS revenue diversification, and I'm joined by two fantastic speakers, the CEO of the Resources Centre of Excellence, Stephen Boxall. Welcome, Stephen.
Hello Jodie, great to be here.
Great. We're also joined by Quality Assurance Manager at local METS company DGH Engineering, Mr. Glen Lamb. Welcome, Glen. Diversification of our METS sector is something we've been talking about for more than a decade now. And now we have this strategy that's going to help guide us into the future. And it also recognises the immense skills and capabilities that exist in our region. But before we jump into our conversation, I think it's really important to frame the conversation in that diversification isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It's taken our region nearly 50 years to become this world-renowned mining and METS innovation hub. But what we really want to aim for is that sustainable diversification, because that is the conduit to economic resilience, not only for our businesses, but for our industries and our region as a whole. So, Stephen, if we take a look at the big picture and the vision for the Greater Whitsunday region, how do you see METS diversification fitting into that?
Oh, that's a challenging question to kick off with, Jodie. Look, I think you're right. It's certainly not out with the old and in with the new. I think, as you rightly point out, our region has evolved over the last number of decades, from what were traditional industries then, to start to move into the mining services, the METS sector, which are now kind of the new traditional industries. So, I think it's about finding those natural synergies of the skills, the people, the innovation, what we offer in our region and how we can align that with some of these emerging industries. So, certainly what we're doing at the RCOE is very much supporting the traditional sector or sectors, but looking for where's that alignment with opportunities. And one of those things that we've been working on at the RCOE is around critical minerals. Like, we know that over the last number of years, the critical mineral sector in Queensland it's a huge opportunity, but we know that, most of those critical minerals are in the ground. So with the skills, the expertise, the people that we've got in our region, it's a great diversification opportunity that not only will it help our region, but it's going to help the world in terms of getting access to Queensland's critical minerals.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not something we're asking businesses to do tomorrow, are we? What we're asking them now is to just start understanding and potentially evaluating against their own business's capabilities.
Again, we've seen that happen where we've had, potentially engineering companies in Mackay that started supporting, agriculture, the sugar sector, then they naturally moved into, as the mine started to develop, 50 odd years ago, they started supporting the growth of the Bowen Basin and the associated infrastructure. They've now moved on to, a range of other things. It's kind of, we're at that pivot again where if you're in a business like Glen at DGH, you look and you go, where's all our income coming from now? How can we further double down on diversification? It's not stopping anything we're doing. It's actually looking ahead and going, okay, we've got these skills, we've got these sheds here in Paget, Townsville, Emerald, these guys are all over the place. How do we really shore up and use the assets that we've got?
Exactly, and you made a good point there. This is still about supporting our traditional industries, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. I think that's that's the thing that people, they start to talk about diversification and people think that that's because we're stopping something and moving to something new. And I think that's the part that we need to be really clear on is we're stopping nothing. We're keeping everything going and we're adding to it.
Exactly, yeah. So let's dive into some of the specifics of our METS sector. We know our METS businesses are innovative, highly skilled, boast unique capabilities, and are increasingly connected into decarbonisation. So that brings me to our next point in that the emerging sectors identified in the METS diversification strategy. I'll just list them quickly. They are critical minerals, renewable energy, bioenergy, biomanufacturing, circular economy, post-mining land use and space. And many of those emerging sectors are driven by decarbonisation. So, Stephen, if you had to pick one of these sectors that's making a positive impact in Greater Whitsunday at the moment, which one would that be and why?
Right at the moment, I think probably all of them, there's examples of but we've really only scratched the surface. I think there's great examples around, look at space, look at what Gilmore Space have done at the Abbott Point facility, and that's been pretty much most of the procurement around building that space base has come out of this region. So that's a great example. I think from a circular economy perspective, within Paget, there's great examples of people that are recycling, repurpose, reusing all sorts of products from both the agriculture and the mining sector. As I mentioned at the outset, like the critical minerals sector, I think we're starting to support the activation of the critical minerals sector. Yes, we don't have any critical minerals like right within our region, or potentially we may have in coal tailings and so on, but what we've got is the expertise like the DGH Engineerings and others that are already supporting the critical mineral sector through building processing plants and through exploration. So, I think for me, there's examples across the whole spectrum where we're already starting to scratch the surface and do good things. It's how we ramp that up now, I think, is the really important thing from here.
Yeah, that's great. Glen, DGH is a METS business synonymous with servicing multiple industries. So what do you make of all this diversification talk?
Looking back on where we've come from and how we've got to here, it can only be obviously a positive for the region, and obviously there's certainly the skills in this region are really well aligned with diversification, and keen to take it from here and see where it goes, I guess.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work you've been doing in helping set up the critical minerals pilot processing plant at the Future Industries Hub?
Yeah, so that's been a really exciting project for us to be involved with, and it's just been really different, I guess, obviously at the start of a new sort of industry, and sort of, I guess, working with new technologies, and obviously the leaders, obviously the academics, and obviously the Department of Resources on this one. It's been just a big eye-opener, and obviously just sort of seeing how we can sort of work with them and use our existing sort of, I guess, skills and knowledge base to assist with this up and coming.
I know it's probably early days, but have there been any learnings for DGH so far?
Yeah, there's definitely been learnings, but obviously working with the state government and obviously the universities, that's sort of been interesting, and obviously just sort of offering our services and support to assist the project.
Do you see the need for any reskilling or upskilling within your workforce to support critical minerals?
I guess the work currently that we're doing with the critical minerals, there's a lot of a significant overlap. This region is really well sort of supported, or skilled to take on that critical minerals sector, and obviously we should be in the box seat really to go from here and go forward, really.
I was fortunate to talk to the Queensland Government's Chief Geologist, Tony Knight, recently, and his words were that the METS sector would be the backbone of the emerging critical minerals sector. What are your thoughts on that, Stephen?
Oh, without a doubt, I think, we know that, it's quite easy to quantify the holdings that we've got in the ground, and we know that there's a market for them. We've seen all the global instability and, tariff wars and so on, which in some ways is linked to critical minerals. So, we know there's the demand, but the gap we have in the middle is actually getting the critical minerals out of the ground and refining the critical minerals, and then potentially adding value to those critical minerals before they're exported. So, I think that's probably the big prize that there is. And then we've got this, again, thousands of people here working in the Paget Industrial Estate that have the expertise to start to build the processing equipment and what's needed for this powerhouse new industry to really emerge. And I suppose just to pick up on Glen's point, when we first started on this project, which was almost 5 years ago, I remember having the first conversation before we even, went anywhere around engineering and procurement to one of the original founders of DGH, and I was telling him what we were going to do, and he said to me, "Oh, we can do that. We can build those components. We can put that together." And I always kept that in the back of my mind as we got a bit more serious about getting into it. Started to talk to Glen, and Glen come to some of the meetings with the people from universities and government and so on, and Glen kept on saying the same thing. "Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. No problems." We get to 4 years down the track, and a few weeks ago we hosted all of the stakeholders to come and have a look at where we're at with the delivery. And to be honest, they were blown away with the quality of work that DGH has done, how they've picked up these designs and just absolutely nailed the componentry, albeit on a smaller scale because it's a pilot processing plant. But I suppose it just goes back to that you can't undersell or undervalue that capability that our region has to just get in and do things, and the transferability of skills across, building boilers for sugar mills to wash plants at, coal mines to critical mineral processing facilities. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a designer, but as everyone keeps on telling me, it's the same process. It doesn't matter what industry. It's you do it in the same fashion. So, I think for us, that's where the big opportunity is. Yeah, we mightn't be the Northwest Mineral Province, but in my way of thinking, that Northwest Mineral Province cannot get activated without the smarts and the people that we've got here in the Mackay-Isaac Whitsunday METS sector.
Let's talk briefly about some of the other sectors that were mentioned in the strategy. We know biomanufacturing is gaining a lot of traction off the back of some really serious investment attraction work. And your team, Stephen, has been heavily involved in circular economy, and I know you have some pretty meaty projects underway as well. And you mentioned before, the burgeoning space sector, which we're eagerly awaiting some exciting developments there. So can you provide some insights into how some of these more mature sectors are contributing to the overall vision for the region?
You look at particularly the coal sector, and everyone's trying to do things better, trying to do things more efficiently, trying to do things more sustainably. And, the terms like circular economy are thrown around a lot. A lot of people claim to be in circularity or circularity experts. When you actually drill down on it and you want to go and look at an example of circularity on the ground, sometimes it can be hard to find. So, it's been really pleasing to work with, again, circularity experts, work with the industry, work with the government to really start to land on, what are some meaty projects that we can deliver on the ground here that are actually going to showcase and lead circularity activity within our region. We've been on this journey working with some key partners like Corio, that are an Australian leading circularity consultancy, and certainly the Queensland State Government in wanting to come up with, well, what are some place-based solutions around circularity? So, certainly in some of those other sectors that you talk about, it's interesting, the crossover. Had someone approach me from a university the other day about biomining. So now what we're talking about using is some of the processes from biomanufacturing to safely extract metals and minerals from ore. So, the traditional methods of processing can use different, chemicals and additives and so on, but now there's a whole new opportunity around biomining to safely extract metals and minerals, which is using the exact same thinking as what QUT is doing out at Racecourse at the biomanufacturing plant. So it's just interesting that one thing leads to another and then they all intersect, and it's kind of mind-blowing to think that our region is at the pointy end of a lot of this. Like, this is not happening in a lot of other regions. It's, maybe our region and a couple of others in Australia.
You say that a lot of these things are intersecting. That circular economy space is really interesting, isn't it? Because I think at the end of the day, we're all going to have to embrace that. And it might be that METS businesses are servicing different sectors, and the outputs of those industries might be contributing to the inputs of another. So therefore, everyone's in that circularity space, aren't they?
Well, and I think the other thing is, and DGH has got some really good examples around, redesigning equipment and so on around the recovery of tungsten. And it wasn't until I, went over to Glen's workshop one day and we started talking about it. They don't see it as circular economy. They just see it as solving problems and smart business.
Yeah.
But once you actually drill down on it, we've got some really amazing outcomes that are happening locally because we've just got smart people who want to solve problems. I doubt there's any businesses out there that haven't already embarked on some sort of diversification. I don't think it needs to be any future diversification, doesn't need to be anything radical. I think there's some, to use the term low-hanging fruit, there's plenty of opportunities out there to get into other opportunities that, it's not as challenging as getting into overseas markets or whatever, by just keeping abreast of what's happening from a decarb perspective, from a critical mineral perspective, a circularity perspective, look at the neighbouring regions around us. Like there's plenty of opportunities to diversify right here, right now. We know that, diversification fills those gaps when traditional industries may be cyclical. So whether that's, the sugar price goes down or the coal price goes down or whatever it might be, we all know it just makes smart business sense to try and have that stable income that when one's down, something else is up and growing. So, that's probably my message is you've probably already been doing it. So just keep on doing more of what you're doing, really.
Yeah. And what about you, Glen? What message would you give other METS businesses around diversification?
There's only benefits, really. And obviously this region is sort of very well suited to obviously other mining sectors and minerals processing facilities. So, I guess there's no real limit, I guess, and we can, it's just mining and with a different, I guess, the outcome, I guess. So it's essentially the same thing, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Excellent. So in terms of what we've talked about today, takeaways for me are we have this deep expertise and capability existing in our region. We have a unique precinct in Paget that is home to, a large percentage of those businesses. Also at the other end of the candle, I guess we're doing a lot of investment attraction work. Steve, can you tell me how the two sides are kind of hopefully going to meet in the middle one day?
Yeah, well, I think it's a challenging, our region's got the same challenges that everyone has around housing and those sorts of things, but you would have to think that our region, especially during a cost of living crisis, is a very ideal place for people to want to come and live because we've got great education, we've got great access to activities, we've got beaches, we've got rainforests, we've got, outdoor activities which don't cost you anything. So, I think our region has got a dead set advantage over everyone in terms of attracting the workers of the future that we're going to need. Why wouldn't you want to come and live in this great region? Jump on a plane, you can be in Brisbane in an hour, 20 minutes. So I think we're naturally going to continue just attracting more and more people that want to come and be in our region and be part of this great journey that we're on. And they're going to have access to jobs, whether that's for mum and dad, whether that's the kids. There's going to be well-paid jobs. There's going to be great education. So I think, we've kind of almost established that perfect ecosystem of why, this region will continue to be a powerhouse and a very desirable place to come and live and work. Yep,
too true. Mm-hmm. What about you, Glen? Any takeaways from today's conversation?
It's only positive, really, and obviously just excited to see what the future holds and work with the community from there, I guess.
Keep up the great work. We're hearing great things. So that brings us to the end of our very first METS and More podcast. If you're a METS SME in the Greater Whitsunday region, first of all, I just encourage you to download the Greater Whitsunday METS sector revenue diversification strategy and just have a review of the emerging sectors that have been identified in that strategy. And also you can have a look at the strength of alignment to our METS sector in that. I think it's really important we start positioning our businesses now for the future. So really encourage you to look at that strategy. In our next episode of METS and More, We'll probably take a deeper dive into one or two of the identified emerging sectors listed in the strategy and bring you more expert insights into those. A big thank you to Stephen and Glen for joining me today. We really appreciate your time and insights. And thank you to our listeners and viewers, and see you next time on the METS and More podcast.